The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the fields in shades of orange and gold. Closer to the edge of the woods, darkness swelled, shadowing the path that twisted toward the lone farmhouse. Inside, Jack the farmer leaned against his wooden door, taking in the peaceful evening around him. He breathed in the earthy scent of the soil, the faint rustle of leaves, and the sweet melody of crickets tuning up for the night. But beneath that tranquility lay an undercurrent, a whisper of unease. 5 masked men were drawing nearer, their forms distorted and sinister under the cloak of dusk. They were out for one thing, a raid. Their plan was simple: arrive unannounced, intimidate Jack into submission, grab whatever they could, and vanish into the night like shadows at sunrise. They believed he wouldn't stand a chance against 5 of them. They thought this was just another easy score. They didn't know Jack. As the first flicker of headlights glinted through the trees, fiercely illuminating the gravel drive, Jack straightened up. He could feel the prickle at the back of his neck. He moved with purpose toward the farmhouse window, peering out at the approaching figures. The maskers laughed, their voices low and conspiratorial, imagining the spoils that awaited them in the quiet of his home. But Jack was built for this, not in terms of muscle or brute strength, but with a resilience that came from years of toil. Farming was a life of struggle, storms that flooded fields, pests that devoured crops, and sometimes the silent suffocation of loneliness. But through it all, Jack had learned to fight. He was a man shaped by the earth beneath his feet, molded by resilience and grit. The men strolled up to the door, swaggering like they owned the night. Knuckles rapped against the wood, a heavy, taunting sound. Jack felt a fire ignite inside him. This was his home, his haven. He didn't care that he was outnumbered. With a quick move, he slipped into his barn. In the farthest corner, he kept a tool he rarely used, an old pitchfork. It had scraped against barn wood more times than he could remember, but tonight it would serve a more profound purpose. The door to his home creaked open. The masked men surged inside, their laughter echoing against the walls like split lightning. One of them called, his voice dripping with mockery. What they didn't expect was the sudden crash of wood hitting the floor behind them. Jack emerged from the shadows, pitchfork raised high, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The barn light gleamed off the metal, creating a point of sharp clarity against the chaos. "Get out," Jack said, his voice steady. The men stopped, surprise flickering across their masked faces amidst the bravado. Jack, in that moment, was not just a farmer. He was a man who had spent countless nights working the fields, wrestling with nature's whims, one who wouldn't let fear rule him. One of the intruders took a step forward, brandishing a crowbar. Jack tightened his grip, grounding himself. Numerous thoughts buzzed in his head, memories of his father teaching him how to fight back against the winds that tore through their crops, lessons learned through years of perseverance. And now he had the rage of a man protecting what was his. The air thickened, tension building like impending thunder. "You don't want to do this," Jack warned. But they laughed again, emboldened by their numbers. They moved in closer, and in that moment, all the fear and doubt that had shadowed Jack for years melted away. There was no room for softness. He was defending much more than just a house. He was protecting his history, his identity. In a flash, the first man lunged at him, crowbar swinging through the air. Jack ducked, pivoting on his heel, thrusting the pitchfork forward. It struck the ground, driving sharp tines into the dirt, cutting off any chance for the man to regroup. The masked man's momentum sent him tumbling, crashing hard against the floor. The laughter died in an instant. The other 4 men hesitated, a flicker of doubt brushing against their bravado. Jack had thrown them off balance, but they weren't done yet. They charged, desperation flooding their eyes, the need for power taking over. Jack's heart raced. He wasn't just fighting off intruders, he was fighting against a lifetime of being underestimated. With a strong flick of the pitchfork, he found his footing, using the long handle to push back against the next assailant. A fierce strike landed just shy of the man's leg and sent him sprawling away. The sound of scrambling feet echoed through the walls. Adrenaline surged as Jack faced the next adversary, a man with wild, frantic eyes. He moved like a cornered animal, and in the mix of fear and rage, Jack saw a fleeting reflection of himself. Every punch felt like a metaphor for all the struggles that shaped him, those endless nights spent planting seeds only to have them washed away by sudden storms. One by one, the masked men fell back, their bravado shattering like glass. As Jack fought, he felt the stories of his ancestors echoing through him. He remembered how they had carved out lives on this very land, how, through wars, droughts, and disease, they remained anchored to their roots. That unyielding strength filled his veins. Suddenly, the door burst open, and beams of light poured in from headlights, casting long shadows over the room. Jack paused for a heartbeat, wary that others might arrive to join the fray against him. But the arriving vehicle wasn't an enemy Irene. His neighbor stepped out, gripping her phone like a lifeline. She shouted, eyes wide as she took in the scene. "Get back," he called back, his voice louder now, filled with urgency. Seeing the lights, the remaining thieves panicked. They broke from a tight circle, their bravado splintering into chaos. The masked men retreated, stumbling over one another in their haste, crashing straight through the door and into the dark night. Jack dropped the pitchfork as they fled, knowing he had won this battle, perhaps not just for himself, but for anyone who might be cornered in such helplessness. Irene rushed to his side, breathless. "Jack, I didn't know what was happening. I saw them through the trees and I'm fine," he interrupted, still catching his breath as the weight of what had just unfolded settled over him. She asked, scanning the room for any signs of further danger. "It was a raid, not a murder," Jack said, straightening his back, feeling that fire smoldering down below. As sirens wailed in the distance, Jack leaned against the doorframe, watching the horizon swallow the last of the sun. The air felt different now, charged with purpose and relief. He defended not just his belongings, but his very essence. Irene stood beside him, her shoulder brushing against his. "You did good, Jack," she whispered, pride swelling in her voice. Maybe in that moment he realized that bravery didn't always roar. Sometimes it was just the calm, steady resolve of a farmer refusing to back down. Jack turned toward the fields, a silhouette against the dying light, a man forged by the land, resilient and proud. He would face whatever came next with the same strength that had seen him through the storms and challenges of life, a warrior in his own right. And as the night settled in, one thing was clear: he was built for this. The wind howled through the fields, a chilling whisper that crawled through the cracks of the old farmhouse. Inside, the sound was merely a backdrop to a deeper tension that hung heavy in the air. Jack the farmer stared out the window, watching the shadows stretch across the property as dusk settled in. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, the end of another long day of work, but something felt different. A sense of foreboding washed over him, wrapping around his heart like an unwelcome guest. A rustle in the foliage caught his eye, a flicker of movement that sparked his instincts. He squinted, peering into the darkness enveloping the edges of his land. Then he saw them, 5 figures, silhouetted against the dying light, creeping closer to his farmhouse. Masks obscured their faces, an eerie testament to their intentions. Jack's heartbeat quickened. He had seen trouble come before, but nothing like this. There was something unsettling about the confidence of the masked men as they approached, their laughter echoing ominously in the stillness of the evening. They thought they could just waltz in and take what wasn't theirs. They were hunters prowling for easy prey. But Jack was no ordinary farmer. He was built for this. He had weathered storms and fended off more than just the occasional pest. Years of hard work had forged him into a man who understood the value of what he fought for. This wasn't just land, it was his legacy, his life. He pulled away from the window and moved silently across the creaky wooden floorboards, each step deliberate as adrenaline coursed through his veins. Jack wasn't armed with a gun or a heavy weapon. He relied on the tools of his trade, his fists, his grit, and an old pitchfork that leaned against the wall in the barn. It was a relic of simpler times, but felt like a lifeline in this moment. By the time the men reached the front door, Jack was waiting in the shadows, his breath steady even as his heart raced. He listened as they banged on the door, their voices grating against the quiet. "Come on, old man, we know you're in there," one of them shouted, a hint of impatience weaving through his tone. Jack held firm, summoning the calm that had come during years spent tending to unyielding crops. "I won't let them do this," he murmured, steering his resolve as he moved towards the barn. Peeking through a crack in the door, he watched as the group shifted and laughed, reveling in their perceived power. But they didn't understand what made someone like Jack stand tall. His life had been a series of battles against droughts that scorched the earth, against pests that feasted on his harvest. He had fought for every seed and every inch of fertile soil. This fight was no different. With a deep breath, Jack slipped into the dimly lit barn, heart pounding, and grabbed that old pitchfork. It felt right in his hands, familiar and strong. He moved back toward the front door, feeling a sense of purpose steel his nerves. The door burst open and the masked men lunged in, their laughter falling silent as they spotted the pitchfork. One sneered, but Jack didn't flinch. He shouted, his voice firm and echoing off the walls of the small space. In that heartbeat, the surprise registered on their faces, and Jack saw the doubt flicker before the bravado returned. They charged, but he was ready. As the first one swung a crowbar, Jack sidestepped and drove the pitchfork into the ground, using the leverage to lift himself and shove the wooden shaft with all his strength. The aggressive motion sent the intruder reeling backward. Another man bellowed, throwing caution to the wind as he lunged at Jack. The chaos around him shifted into slow motion. All those years of hard lessons and relentless work fused into clarity. Jack moved with purpose, wrestling against the fear that threatened to creep in. He knew he could be hurt, but he wouldn't allow it to happen without a fight. He swept his pitchfork into the next assailant, catching him off guard and sending him stumbling across the floor. Growls of surprise rippled through the rest, and in that chaotic dance of confrontations, the atmosphere turned electric. Jack felt alive, his senses sharpened, even as the odds stacked against him. Each man that hit the ground represented a piece of his legacy that he was determined to protect. One of them yelled, their confidence faltering as Jack pushed through. He felt the challenges of his life lead him into this moment. He had worked the land through storms, endured loss, fought through exhaustion. This felt like an extension of those trials. A third man charged him, and Jack's instincts kicked in again. He dropped low and thrust the pitchfork upward, catching the masked man under the chin. The force sent him crashing to the ground. Pain pulsed in Jack's hands, but it barely registered. There was a fire igniting in his chest, a warrior spirit unfurling within him. "That's it," he roared. The laughter was gone, fear now hung in the air, heavy and thick. The remaining two men exchanged glances, uncertainty etching lines across their faces. Jack stood tall, unyielding, a bulwark against their greed. They began to back away, retreating slowly, and he sensed their resolve crumbling under the weight of desperation. But just as they turned to flee through the doorway, Jack's neighbor, Irene, appeared, her headlights piercing through the darkness. Confusion gripped her features as she took in the scene, the masked men trying to escape, Jack standing firm with the pitchfork raised high. "Jack," she called, stepping into the fray. There was a flare of determination in her eyes that lit a new fire within him. Jack shouted, his resolve inflamed by her presence. She didn't hesitate, whipping out her phone, her fingers moving deftly as she dialed, adrenaline coursing through her. In that moment, the last vestiges of bravado fled the masked men. Their fear tilted into survival. Jack took a step forward, pitchfork steady in his hands. His voice rang out, firm and unyielding. The men hesitated, then turned, scrambling into the night, their plans shattered like glass against the paving stones. Jack watched them flee, his breath heavy but steady, the adrenaline giving way to the satisfaction of victory. As the sirens approached in the distance, he lowered the pitchfork, feeling the tension begin to dissipate. It wasn't just a victory over intruders, it was a testament to who he was, a farmer built by years of perseverance, unwilling to back down, fighting for everything he held dear. Irene rushed to his side, her eyes wide with concern. "I'm fine," he assured her, though shaking adrenaline still coursed through his veins. She nodded, understanding the raw emotion thrumming in the air around them. This was more than just a fight. It was a reminder that strength doesn't only come from physical prowess. It comes from knowing who you are and what you are willing to stand up for. The police arrived moments later, lights flashing against the barn and house, painting the scene in vibrant hues of red and blue. Jack explained the situation, his voice steady as the officers surveyed the remnants of chaos. Each word felt like steel and fire, reaffirming his role as protector of this land. Hours later, as the glow of dawn spilled across the fields and the darkness lifted, Jack stood alone at the edge of the property, his body weary but his spirit unbroken. The night's turmoil had transformed into a lesson both for him and for any who might think twice about trespassing on his land. A farmer, yes, but also a man, a fighter, unwilling to yield in the face of fear. He looked across his land, feeling the sun warm his back. Every blade of grass, every inch of soil was a reminder of the battles he had fought and the victories that defined him. Where others saw vulnerability, he saw resilience. Where there was fear, there was strength. It wasn't just about what he could grow, it was about what he was willing to protect, and in that moment, in the gentle light of morning, he found clarity. He was built for this. Thunder rumbled in the distance as twilight began to creep across the sky, a dim curtain falling over the small farmhouse nestled on the edge of the woods. Jack, the farmer, wiped his brow, gazing out across the fields that had both nourished and tested him for decades. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving hues of orange and purple in its wake, but what had been a peaceful evening was about to take a dramatic turn. As he turned to head inside, a rustle caught his attention from the shadows beyond the barn. He squinted into the darkness, a chill creeping down his spine. It wasn't just the wind whispering through the grass, it felt like a warning. Every instinct he had honed through years of labor gripped him. His heart raced like a stampede, urging him to spring into action. Moments later, 5 figures emerged from the dark, moving stealthily, their faces concealed by ominous masks that reflected nothing but malice. Jack felt ice form in his veins. They were men on a mission, and by the looks of it, his farm was their target. With a flick of their wrists, they fanned out, laughter echoing off the sides of his home, a sound that twisted knots in his stomach. They believed they were predators, and he, merely a farmer, vulnerable and alone. Their approach exuded confidence, a fatal mistake that would lead to their downfall. Jack pressed back against the wall of his house, heart thudding in his chest. He dealt with pests before, mice in the grain, crows in the cornfield, but this was different. This felt personal. He glanced over at his barn, where rusted tools and memories mingled. Beside the door, hidden yet prominent, was an old pitchfork. It had weathered many storms and handled countless harvests. It had the power to protect what was rightfully his. As the men crept closer, the sound of their taunts broke through the air around him. "You've got something we want, old man." Their words danced in the night like a sinister lullaby. He couldn't let fear constrict him. Jack rushed into the barn, grabbing that pitchfork, feeling the cool metal against his palm. He may not have muscle-bound strength, but he had something more potent resolve. Years of hard work, sweat, and sacrifice had built him into a man who knew the value of standing his ground. With the pitchfork raised, he opened the door to his home. The sight that greeted him was madness, a swirl of masked figures angling for control. The first intruder turned, surprise flashing across his features. Jack seized the moment. He shouted, voice echoing with authority, tinged with the raw power of desperation. The masked man hesitated, confusion flickering before the bravado returned, and he lunged forward with a crowbar. Jack reacted instinctively, using the pitchfork to thrust sideways, leveraging its length to shove the man off balance. He stumbled, crashing to the floor like a marionette with its strings cut. the laughter faded, replaced by fear. Jack's heart pounded louder, each beat resonating with purpose. He wasn't simply defending his possessions, he was protecting the years of memories and the dreams intertwined with this land. Another man advanced, this one bulkier, filled with bravado. "You think you can take us on with that?" The challenge rolled off his tongue like a dare. Jack stood unwavering. And with that, he swung the pitchfork, catching the man's arm, sending him reeling backward. The remaining intruders gaped in disbelief. They had come expecting an easy score, but found a man built on years of grit and determination. Jack could see uncertainty swimming in their eyes, and it fueled his confidence. He was a force they hadn't counted on. The third man charged, fear morphing into rage. Jack pivoted, ducking beneath the swing of a brick that whistled through the air. He thrust the pitchfork again, catching this assailant in the side. Panic transformed into chaos as the men began to scatter, realizing they weren't prepared for the fight before them. But the fourth man was not finished, his courage spurred on by the panic swirling around him. He lunged at Jack, only to be met with the pitchfork's tines once more. Jack twisted, sidestepping the attacker. In the fleeting moment of chaos, he swung low, the pitchfork striking the ground and risking his own balance. The intruder fell, the resolve to continue shattered before the power of the unexpected farmer. At that moment, everything changed. The last two men, now terrified, glanced at each other, their bravado fragmenting in the face of Jack's fury. They had underestimated him, the quiet farmer who lived on the edges of town, known more for his kindness than his strength. Now the air crackled with tension. Jack felt alive, as though every ounce of his being had been ignited. This was more than a fight. It was about holding onto his legacy, his life's work. The fight for survival surged through him, lighting a fire of determination in his chest. Then a voice from outside called his name. Jack, it was Irene, his neighbor, her headlights cutting through the night like a beacon. She had seen the chaos unfold, and with her arrival, a new level of courage surged within him. "Irene," Jack shouted, his voice a mix of urgency and confidence. Her eyes widened, taking in the scene, the masks, the chaos, the pitchfork firmly grasped in Jack's hands. Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen as she dialed for help. The intruders, recognizing their time was running out, hesitated further. Jack advanced, still wielding the pitchfork like a protective shield, a barrier between them and the legacy that was his home. He yelled one last time, and it struck them, a realization that here stood a man who was willing to fight. They exchanged frightened glances before bolting towards the door, stumbling over one another like wild animals caught in a trap. Jack watched them flee into the shadows of the night, his heart still racing but the adrenaline beginning to settle. He had faced down what seemed insurmountable, transformed fear into strength, and emerged victorious. The sirens began to wail in the distance, a chorus signaling safety was close at hand. When the police finally arrived, their lights flashing bright against the darkness, Jack leaned against the doorframe, still breathing hard yet resolute. He felt pride swell in his chest, an emotion interspersed with the relief that time had brought him. The officers quickly assessed the scene, taking statements and collecting themselves, but for Jack, the fight had already shifted. "I'm fine," he managed to say, though it was only half true. He was shaken, but he wouldn't allow fear to take root in his heart. The farmhouse, the land had been protected. He wasn't just a farmer today, he was a defender, a fighter who stood grounded where he belonged. Irene stood beside him, her eyes darting between Jack and the officers. Her voice vibrated with relief and admiration. He nodded, still stunned by the tempest that had just passed. "I didn't think they'd come like that," he admitted, glancing down at the pitchfork resting by his side, a simple tool of the trade turned into an instrument of defense. "It's been a tough time for a lot of folks," Irene said, her voice low. Jack felt a pang of sadness, understanding what desperation could do to people. He had seen it before, the lengths one might go to when they had nothing left to lose. "This is my home." The last streaks of sunlight shimmered on the horizon as dawn began to break. "You know this place like the back of your hand, Jack," Irene continued. This was more than a defense. It was a testament to resilience, the very essence of who Jack was. Each seed he planted, each crop he harvested had prepared him for this. It wasn't just about farming, it was about a life lived with purpose. As the police wrapped up their investigation, Jack made his way back toward the fields, feeling the changing colors of the sky ignite a sense of hope within him. The land had watched him grow, witnessed his battles, and now it had offered him the strength he needed to fight back. Each row planted beneath the sun told a story, and today it was a story of survival. Standing alone in the early morning light, he could feel the gentle embrace of the earth beneath his feet. Behind him, the farmhouse stood proud, a stronghold against whatever might come. Jack inhaled deeply, letting the fresh air fill him with the promise of a new day. In that moment, he understood something profound. He wasn't just built for farming, he was built for life, built to stand tall against whatever storms came his way. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the fields, he stood ready not just as a farmer, but as a guardian of his own destiny. And as the world turned, Jack felt an unbreakable bond with the land he called home, the promise of tomorrow fueling his spirit. No masked men, no shadows creeping in the night could take this away from him. He was resolute. He was built for this. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the lush green fields that bordered the small farmhouse. Jack stood outside, wiping the sweat from his brow after a long day of tilling the soil. His hands, rough and calloused from years of hard work, held a certain pride. This land had been in his family for generations, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it away from him. But that evening, as the evening breeze rustled through the corn, an unsettling feeling crept into his bones. Just as he turned to head inside, a movement in the far-off trees snagged his attention. He squinted, the fading light making it hard to discern what was happening. And then he saw them, 5 figures approaching from the shadows, their faces obscured by dark masks. A surge of adrenaline coursed through him. They were masked men, and they were coming straight for his home. Courage and fear danced a delicate ballet within him. Jack had seen many things in his years of farming wild animals, harsh weather, and hard times, but this was different. These men were predators hunting for prey. His heart raced as they edged closer, laughing among themselves, the chilling sound of their voices slicing through the quiet of the evening. They believed they could waltz in, snatch what they wanted, and leave without consequence. The thought made his blood boil. Jack shifted his weight, his resolve hardening. This was his home. No one had the right to threaten it. As the men reached the driveway, Jack took a deep breath, focusing on the barn behind him. Inside, against the wall, was an old pitchfork, a simple tool, but in the right hands, it could be a formidable weapon. He felt a smile tugging at his lips as he thought of it. The old pitchfork had weathered storms and cared for years of crops. This time it would defend his legacy. With a sense of purpose, he dashed into the barn, grabbing the pitchfork and positioning himself just inside the door of the farmhouse. He peered through the window, heart pounding, as the intruders sauntered up the porch steps. They had no idea what they were about to face. The leader knocked on the door, the dull thud resonating ominously. "Hey, we know you're in there, old man." The bravado in his voice felt like a taunt. Jack tightened his grip on the handle, muscles coiling with tension. He bellowed, his voice echoing with authority. He would not be intimidated. The men hesitated, confusion flashing across their masks, and then laughter erupted among them. Look at him, just a farmer with a pitchfork. Someone scoffed, emboldened by the strength of numbers. Jack's heart raced, but he held firm. Digging deep, he recalled countless moments spent fighting against the elements, floods that tried to wash away everything he'd worked for, droughts that left his crops parched. Each battle forged him, made him resilient. He knew what was at stake. The door, old and creaky, splintered as they kicked it in, sending a jolt of energy through Jack. His heart pounded in his chest as the masked intruders stumbled inside, their bravado seasoned with a hint of glee. They thought this was going to be easy. One of them took the lead, brandishing a crowbar. He sneered, stepping toward Jack, who stood tall, unwavering. "I won't tell you again. Leave or you'll regret it," Jack warned, using every ounce of confidence he had. This was about more than money. It was about defending his home, his life's work. The first masked thug lunged at him, crowbar swinging through the air like a pendulum of doom. Jack ducked and rolled to the side just in time, grabbing the pitchfork and thrusting it forward with everything he had. The tine struck the ground hard, sending a shock through his arms, but it also caught the intruder off guard, staggering backward. The man gasped, disbelief clouding his eyes. The others hesitated, their bravado cracking as Jack stood poised, pitchfork raised high. Fear rippled through the group, but desperation fueled the assailants. Another man charged, leaping forward with fists flying. Jack was ready. He sidestepped again, using the pitchfork like a spear. With a calculated thrust, he caught the assailant in the midsection, sending him tumbling to the ground, the air stilled, charged with the intensity of the moment. The laughter had faded, replaced by uncertainty. Jack felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with primal instinct. He was no longer just protecting his home. This was about survival. This was his moment to reclaim his territory, to send a message that he wouldn't be an easy target. One of the remaining men shouted, lunging forward in willful ignorance. The rest followed, their fear morphing into rage. But Jack was resolute, his feet planted firmly as he pivoted, ready to face them head-on. The third man swung wide, attempting to land a punch, but Jack dodged, twirling the pitchfork in a graceful arc. With a swift movement, he thrust it toward the intruder's feet, knocking him off balance. The man fell, screaming as he hit the ground hard, panic rippling through the group. "Stop!" shouted the leader, but it was too late. The mere sight of their downed companions shattered their fearlessness. Jack advanced, stepping over the sprawled bodies that littered the floor. His heart surged with adrenaline, each beat echoing with defiance. "This is my land." The masked men stumbled, fear overtaking their misguided bravado. With every step Jack took, they retreated, glancing frantically at one another as the strength in their numbers evaporated. But as Jack stood firm, there was a sudden flash of headlights outside, illuminating the room like a searching beacon. Jack turned to see Irene, his neighbor, getting out of her car, concern etching her features. "Jack," she called, her voice slicing through the adrenaline-fueled chaos. He shouted back, feeling the rays of hope seep into him. The moment they heard her voice, the remaining intruders panicked. In a flurry of fear, they scrambled toward the door, realizing their escapade was coming to an abrupt end. Jack surged forward, ensuring they felt the weight of his presence. One of the last two masked men, sensing defeat, swung wildly at Jack, but he easily sidestepped, the pitchfork ready. The intruder hesitated, weighing his options. Jack's response was swift and calculated. In one clean motion, he turned and shoved the pitchfork towards him, cleaving through fear and aggression. The man fell to the floor, and with that, only the leader remained. The leader barked, desperation creeping into his voice as he tried to make a run for it, but Jack wasn't done. In a final act of unwavering resolve, he stepped forward, blocking the doorway, his stance unwavering. "You're not leaving until the police get here," Jack declared, his voice steady. The control he exerted over the situation was palpable, and panic flickered in the thug's eyes. The leader spun back toward the window, considering escape, but before he could act, a chorus of sirens wailed in the distance. The sound crept closer, mixing with the chaos inside. "Too late," Jack said, sensing the panic engulfing the man. The sheriff's department was known for its quick response time, and Jack knew he had a few minutes to hold his ground. He held the pitchfork steady as the masked man took a step back, his bravado crumbling into raw fear. Jack felt the flood of emotion swirling within him, a mix of triumph and adrenaline. Every element of his life hinged on this moment. He was willing to fight for what was rightfully his. The door swung open and officers poured in, flashlights cutting through the dimness, ready for action. One of them yelled, directing the masked intruder to step back. Relief surged through Jack as he lowered his pitchfork, the weight of the moment finally settling. The officers quickly restrained the masked man, taking control of the situation while Jack stood off to the side, still reeling from what had just unfolded. Irene rushed to his side, concern etched into every line of her face. She asked, a tremor in her voice, and it hit Jack then how close danger had come to his doorstep. "I'm fine," he replied, though the truth lay somewhere deeper. There was a mix of shock and adrenaline coursing through him, but he refused to let it show. He had managed to protect his home. He stood tall, unyielding. As the officers wrapped up the scene, Jack felt the surge of pride swell within him. He had faced fear head-on and triumphed. He was a farmer, yes, but he was also a protector of his legacy, ready to stand his ground against any storm that approached. Irene placed her hand on his arm, offering silent support as the officers led the masked men away in handcuffs. "You did incredibly well, Jack. I saw everything," she said, her voice steady and warm. "Just doing what needed to be done," he replied, glancing out into the fields where the sun would rise again, illuminating the landscape he had fought so hard to protect. This land has seen a lot. As dawn broke, a soft glow painted the fields, the promise of a new day unfolding before him. Jack drew in a deep breath, feeling the sense of triumph wash over him. He had emerged not just as a farmer, but as a defender of his home. Years of hard work, sweat, and resilience had prepared him for this moment. He understood now that his strength wasn't just in his arms or his tools. It was in his heart, in the tales of every battle he'd fought, every crop he'd nurtured. The fight wasn't just a reflection of his fear, but a testament to his tenacity, his spirit. With the sound of sirens fading into the distance, Jack stood proudly as the sun rose higher, illuminating the life he had carved out with his own hands. He was ready for whatever lay ahead, not just as a farmer, but as a man crafted by the earth, resilient and unwavering. He was built for this. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the rolling hills of the farmland, where Jack had toiled for decades. The golden glow spilled over his fields like a warm embrace, but there was something unsettling in the air. Jack could feel it. Years of instinct had taught him to read the land, the sky, and even the silence. And today that silence felt heavy, almost oppressive. As he wiped the sweat from his brow after a long day of harvesting, he gazed down the road that led to his secluded property. The trees fluttered in the evening breeze, and for just a moment he felt a flicker of peace. But it was fleeting. His instincts kicked into overdrive as he spotted movement at the edge of his fields. 5 figures emerged from the thickening shadows, their faces hidden beneath dark masks. Heart pounding, Jack's blood ran cold. They moved with a confidence that made his stomach churn, a predator's swagger as if they owned the night. He knew at once they were trouble, a storm gathering on the horizon. "Not on my watch," he muttered to himself. The shadows of doubt vanished, replaced by a steely resolve. Jack was built for this. He had weathered storms far worse than this. He turned toward the farmhouse, then glanced back at the masked figures approaching steadily. They were laughing, exchanging jibes that echoed through the dusk. "Let's teach this old man a lesson," one of them shouted. Jack's muscles tightened. Their bravado didn't scare him. He had dealt with adversity before: harsh winters, droughts that cracked the earth, and personal losses that had nearly broken him. But he would not bend or break tonight. Rushing into his barn, Jack grabbed the pitchfork that had been a loyal companion through countless seasons. It felt solid in his hands, just like the endless hours he'd spent working the land that nurtured him. With the pitchfork gripped firmly, he stepped back to the farmhouse door, taking a deep breath as he pressed himself against the wall. There was no way he was letting these intruders take anything from him. As the men reached the porch, Jack felt the anger welling inside him. They were making a grave mistake. He steadied his breathing, the world narrowing down to just the sounds of his heartbeat and the familiar creak of the farmhouse boards beneath his feet. When the first man kicked in the door, laughter trailing behind him, the fearlessness faltered instantaneously as Jack confronted them. With a fierce yell, he charged into the fray, pitchfork raised high above his head. "This is my land." The masked men stopped short, shock sweeping over their faces, but it was only a momentary pause. Reacting with aggression, one of them lunged, swinging a crowbar at Jack. In that heartbeat, instincts kicked in. He ducked, pivoting just in time. The rush of adrenaline flooded his system. Channeling his focus like a farmer tending to crops, he spun around with the pitchfork and aimed it downward, the tines slamming into the ground and creating a barrier between him and the aggressor. Man stumbled backward, losing his grip on the crowbar, and before he could regain his footing, Jack lunged forward, the pitchfork swinging like a whirlwind. The tines barely grazed the assailant's leg, a stark reminder that he was fighting a man who wouldn't back down easily. The remaining 4 intruders looked at each other, fear piercing through their bravado. Jack bore down on them, adrenaline igniting his senses. He growled, stepping forward with a fierce determination that made the remaining men hesitate. One shouted, futilely trying to regain control, but Jack was a force they hadn't prepared for. The second man charged him, fists flying like a wild animal, unhinged and furious. Jack sidestepped, avoiding the wild swing, and used the pitchfork to push the intruder away, knocking him off balance. The man careened sideways, crashing into a wall with a thud. The laughter and taunting had faded, replaced by an unsettling uncertainty. Jack's heart raced, but he felt a surge of power, the thrill of standing his ground, of defending what was rightfully his. The third intruder rushed at him, a look of furious determination in his eyes. Jack felt a spark of realization. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a test of spirit, a trial of resilience. Jack had been cultivating that resilience for years on the farm against all odds. He ducked again, narrowly avoiding the punch aimed for his head. In one smooth motion, he thrust the pitchfork downward, catching the man's foot. A cry echoed in the air, confusion on his face as he fell. The fear was palpable now. The remaining 2 men exchanged glances, their confidence slipping away like grains of sand. Jack knew that moment well. He had experienced it many times throughout his life. It was that cold realization when the storm was no longer just threatening, but had erupted into reality. "Let's bail," one of them yelled, fear cutting through the bravado like a knife. Jack felt a surge of pride as he pressed forward, determined not to let them escape. Jack shouted, causing the last masked man to turn abruptly, desperation painting his features. Then a powerful beam of headlights splashed across the front of the farmhouse. Jack's heart leaped as he turned to see his neighbor, Irene, stepping out of her car. "Jack," she called, concern etched across her face. He yelled back, knowing that her presence could change everything. The intruders looked panicked. They hadn't expected anyone else to be around. Jack capitalized on that moment of confusion. "You're not getting away," he threatened, his resolve a wall against their encroaching fear. The remaining masked man scrambled toward the door, adrenaline coursing through him. But Jack moved quickly, blocking his escape path. In one swift movement, he thrust the pitchfork out again, making the man stumble back. Driven by raw emotion, Jack felt alive and powerful. Irene dialed the police, her voice quaking but assured as she relayed the chaos inside. The sight of Jack facing down the intruders added to her own courage. In that instant, she wasn't just a neighbor, she was an ally in his fight. Jack shouted once more, eyes blazing with determination as the last masked man weighed his options. Fear pooled in the air as he realized the odds had shifted and all his bravado evaporated. Just then, the sirens echoed in the distance, a choir of salvation. Jack stood tall, pitchfork steady at his side, like a warrior ready to defend. The intruder faltered, glancing toward the door. He shouted at his cohorts, turning to flee. Their bravado transformed into chaos as they stumbled toward the exit, bodies colliding in their haste to escape. Jack held his ground, adrenaline coursing, refusing to cower. He boomed as if the very earth echoed his command. The remaining figures cascaded out the door, and Jack seized the moment, pushing through the doorway, the pitchfork raised like a banner of defiance. The intruders barreled past him, fear gripping their hearts, but for Jack, this was a moment of triumph. It felt like the calm after a fierce storm, the wildness of adrenaline settling into something more profound, a sense of victory. As the police arrived, lights flashing and directives shouted, Jack lowered the pitchfork, breathless yet steady. Masked men were quickly apprehended, their ambitions extinguished in the face of Jack's fierce defense. The weight on his shoulders began to lift as the officers secured the area and gathered information. Irene rushed to his side, a mix of relief and pride in her eyes. "Jack, you were incredible." "I did what was necessary," he replied, his heart still racing. Hours later, as darkness melted into dawn, Jack stepped outside to survey the aftermath, the air crisp and fresh after the storm of chaos. The sun splashed warm colors across the fields he had fought to protect. He felt a wave of gratitude washing over him for the land that had anchored him through the years and the strength that surged within him when it mattered most. Standing on the porch, he took a moment. Every battle he had faced seemed to converge here, a culmination of years of resilience and hard work. He recalled the whispers of doubt that used to creep in during long, lonely nights, those moments when fear threatened to wrap around him like a vine, but they were now silenced by the bravery he had shown. Today wasn't just about survival, it was a renewal of purpose, a reminder that he could face whatever storms might come next, masked or unmasked. He was built for this, built by the soil beneath his feet, by the sun that warmed his back, by the struggles he had overcome. As the morning light broke over the horizon, illuminating the land that meant everything to him, Jack knew he would always stand strong. The challenges of life might continue to come and go, but his resolve would remain unyielding. The legacy of his ancestors echoed within him, a chorus of strength that would always push him to fight for what was right. And as he inhaled the sweet scent of the earth, vibrant and alive, he felt a surge of hope for the days ahead. He was not just a farmer. He was a guardian, a fighter, and most importantly, he was built for this. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over Jack's sprawling farmland. The fields were golden, ripe, and ready for harvest, but something felt off. A chill ran through the air, and Jack could sense it even well before he spotted them. 5 dark figures emerged from the tree line, their bodies cloaked in black, faces hidden behind sinister masks. He peered closer, heart thumping hard against his chest. Were they lost hikers? No, the determined way they marched was anything but lost. Jack stepped back, heart racing. Panic seized him for a split second, but the fear was quickly replaced by a smoldering ember of resolve. These men were trouble, and they had come here with a plan. He could see it in their swagger as they approached silently, the anticipation of their malicious intentions crackling in the air. Jack had worked too hard for this land, too long to let a band of masked men threaten it. In that moment, he became acutely aware of everything he had built: the farmhouse, the crops, and the legacy of those who had come before him. He felt the weight of that history as he turned toward his barn. An old pitchfork rested against the wall, rusted but reliable. He imagined the long hours spent in the fields, the sweat dripping from his brow as he toiled, and a fire ignited within him. He wouldn't back down, not now, not ever. With a firm grip on the pitchfork, Jack stepped out of the shadows and into the fading light of day. He could hear the intruders' now laughter, coarse and mocking, filled the air as they approached his porch. Jack, standing tall, took a breath, grounding himself. This was his home, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it away from him. "What's the matter, old man?" One of the masked men taunted, standing at the top of the steps with a wicked grin. The others chuckled, their excitement palpable. They believed they could intimidate him into submission. Jack held up the pitchfork, steadying himself as he took a step forward. "Get off my property." The leader's laughter faded, replaced by a glimmer of uncertainty. "What's that?" He motioned for the others to join him, and they spread out menacingly, shadows falling across the porch. Jack's heart thrummed in his chest. He knew he was outnumbered, but there was no room for doubt. He could feel years of hard labor and sacrifice fueling his resolve. This was a fight for honor, for pride, and most importantly, for survival. In a sudden surge, the men charged toward him, and Jack sidestepped, pivoting swiftly as the first one lunged with a crowbar. The attack was wild, but Jack had long practiced evasion in his fields, dodging falling branches, avoiding wayward tools. He swung the pitchfork with all his might, narrowly missing the man but making his presence known. He shouted, voice booming. The energy shifted, the laughter dying down as the remaining men faltered, suddenly unsure. Jack took another step forward, imposing and fierce. The masked men exchanged glances, and for a moment, uncertainty shimmered in their eyes. But one of them, a stocky figure, rushed at Jack again, fueled by anger and desperation. With adrenaline pumping through his veins, Jack ducked low, thrusting the pitchfork towards the ground just as the intruder charged. The man tripped and fell, crashing against the wooden planks of the porch. It was chaos. The initial shock of Jack's resolve seemed to ripple through the group. The moment hung heavy in the air. They were losing their bravado, realizing that this wasn't going to be an easy score. They came in thinking they were predators, but Jack stood like a wall, unwavering. Fueled by a mix of adrenaline and survival instinct, Jack felt alive. He pivoted, ready to face another intruder who approached him from the side, fists clenched in anger. Jack wasn't just fighting for land, he was fighting for respect, fighting against years of being underestimated. As the man swung, Jack sidestepped again, this time swinging the pitchfork wide, catching the man by surprise. The tines flashed in the dim light, making contact with his leg. Jack yelled, the pitchfork dancing menacingly as the others hesitated. The hesitation grew into fear. They had come here thinking Jack was nothing more than an old farmer, an easy target. They hadn't expected him to fight back, to embody the strength that came from working day in and day out on the unforgiving land. Stop. One of the men shouted, now more desperate than angry. But as they regrouped, Jack charged forward again, pushing their doubt to the edge. He saw the confusion in their eyes. They hadn't signed up for this kind of challenge. In that moment, the energy shifted. Jack thrust the pitchfork forward once more, striking at the nearest masked figure. The man recoiled, catching it in the side and letting out a gasp of surprise. Fear was finally vanquishing their bravado. Shouted the leader, but his voice trembled now, and Jack saw the crack in his confidence. The intruders were faltering, backpedaling as they realized one lone farmer could stand against them. Then, just as Jack prepared to press on, he heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling up. His heart quickened. Could it be someone from the town, or perhaps the sheriff? The headlights swung across the yard, illuminating the chaos that unfolded on his porch. It was Irene, his neighbor. She jumped out of her car, concern etching her features as she took in the scene. Jack standing firm with the pitchfork, men scrambling in panic. "Jack," she shouted, stepping toward the fray. He shouted back, drawing strength from her presence. The masked men looked toward the sound, and their confidence shattered completely. They glanced at one another, realizing their gig was up. Jack felt a surge of renewed determination. This was his moment to drive them back. Jack warned, stepping closer to the men, pitchfork still raised. The leader joked weakly, but the bravado was gone. Desperation was clawing at his voice as he glanced toward the tree line, debating escape. Irene held her phone up, dialing 911, her fingers moving quickly. She called, her determination infectious. One of the intruders shouted, now filled with fear and regret. They stumbled towards the path, legs moving in chaotic haste, but Jack wasn't finished yet. He rushed forward, blocking the exit, wielding the pitchfork like a spear. He roared, every word punctuated with the confidence forged over years of hard labor. As the masked men tried to dart around him, Jack pushed them back, the tines of the pitchfork almost grazing their shoulders. They had thought they could waltz in and take what was not theirs, but they had underestimated him. The leader stumbled, realizing they had nowhere to go. He shouted, panic in his eyes. Jack declared, his voice a barrier forged from years of resilience. Just then, the distant wail of sirens pierced the air, a choir of rescue that spurred Jack's spirit. With one last glance over his shoulder, the masked men broke and ran, scrambling down the porch steps, veering off into the trees. They vanished into the night, and Jack stood there, his pulse finally beginning to slow. As the police arrived, lights flashing, Jack lowered the pitchfork, breathless but unbroken. The officers rushed past him, securing the area and ensuring there were no lingering threats. He glanced at Irene, gratitude flooding him. "You were amazing, Jack," she said, eyes wide with exhilaration and disbelief. "I didn't have a choice," he replied, shaking slightly from adrenaline. "They thought they could take what was mine." The sound of the sirens faded slowly as Jack caught his breath, reality washing over him. He had faced fear and come out victorious, but beyond that lay a deep understanding of what it truly meant to protect one's home. As the officers gathered evidence and spoke with Irene, Jack stepped out onto the porch again, feeling the cool evening air on his skin. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the weight of the evening settled in. His heart swelled with pride. This land had been his for years, and he would do anything to defend it. In that moment of quiet, he realized something profound. He was not just a farmer, he was a guardian. The tomorrows he had fought for were worth every ounce of strength within him. No longer would he allow anyone to threaten the peace he had cultivated. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the fields in hues of orange and purple. As the last light of day flickered away, Jack felt a renewed sense of strength. He would rise again tomorrow, tending to his crops, fiercely defending his legacy. But he also understood that fear could come in many forms. Facing it head-on had not only brought clarity, but a sense of empowerment. The next time life threw adversity at him, he would draw on this experience. The fight for his home would light a fire in him that could never be extinguished. Turning back towards the fields, Jack felt the weight of his ancestors behind him, filling him with warmth and courage. This is what it meant to persevere. He was built for this, shaped by the very earth he stood upon, forged through trials that would only make him stronger. And as the stars began to twinkle above, Jack stood resolute on his land. He would meet each new day with the same fiery spirit. With a heart full of hope and a fighting spirit that refused to yield, he knew without a doubt he was built for this. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the fields that Jack had toiled in for years. The ripe corn swayed gently in the evening breeze, a peaceful scene that would soon be shattered. Just as Jack closed the barn door behind him, a strange chill swept through the air, stirring something deep inside him, an instinct honed through years of hard work. He squinted into the fading light, his gaze drawn to shadows moving along the tree line. 5 figures emerged, moving silently, their faces hidden behind dark masks. Jack's heart raced, an unsettling feeling creeping up his spine. He had dealt with storms, droughts, and pests, but nothing like this. These weren't just shadows, they were intruders. "Hey," a voice echoed through the calm, shattering the silence. Laughter followed, cruel and mocking. Jack stood frozen for a heartbeat, then adrenaline kicked in. He was about to face something he never anticipated, but he could not let fear paralyze him. This was his land, and he would fight for it. As they inched closer, the figures grew bolder, laughing amongst themselves about what they might take. Jack glanced back at the barn. He had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let anyone threaten what was rightfully his. He moved quickly, slipping inside and grabbing the old pitchfork that had been left behind, a simple tool, but in his hands it felt like a sword ready to defend his legacy. He called, stepping outside with one hand gripping the pitchfork, the other wavering but ready. The intruders froze, their laughter dying in an instant. There was hesitation, a flicker of doubt. One of them sneered, trying to invade Jack's resolve, a garden tool. Jack dug deep within himself, recalling the long hours spent planting seeds, cultivating the soil, and pushing against the elements. He was a man built for the sears of fighting through floods, pest infestations, and unforgiving winters. "You don't want to do this," he warned, voice stronger than he felt, confidence mounting with each word. The leader of the group stepped forward, a cocky grin plastered on his face. "What do you think you're gonna do?" Jack stood tall, heart pounding, but this time fueled by determination. He thought of his ancestors, those who had walked this land before him, and it filled him with a sense of purpose. Laughter erupted once again, but it sounded less certain this time. Fear began to creep back into their expressions. One man, who looked a bit less cocky than the others, was clearly wavering. "Maybe we should just go," he suggested, glancing back at the road. But the leader scoffed and pushed past him, lunging at Jack with a crowbar, his movements swift but clumsy. Jack sidestepped and in one deft motion thrust the pitchfork forward. The tine struck the ground, sending a shockwave reverberating through Jack's arms. He wasn't just defending his home, he was embodying every hardship and every victory he'd ever known. The intruder stumbled, crashing to the ground in a heap. The others gasped, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Jack felt the adrenaline surge through him. This was no longer just a defense of his land, it was a declaration of strength. The leader screamed, panic creeping into his voice as he saw his companion crumpled on the porch. The remaining masked men hesitated, confusion battling with aggression. Someone shouted, but Jack met the challenge with a fierce determination. He moved toward them, pitchfork held high, driving them back one step at a time. The fight for survival ignited something primal deep inside him. Another man lunged, fists raised, but Jack had managed to anticipate the attack. He ducked under the wild swing, thrusting the pitchfork low and catching the attacker's foot. The man howled, tripping and sprawling onto the wooden floor. The air around them thickened with tension, laced with fear. They hadn't just entered a fight, they were facing a man determined to protect what was his. Jack pressed the advantage, swinging the pitchfork again and again, not for want of violence, but as a desperate act of protection. Each thrust and swing mirrored the struggles he had faced throughout his life, from cold winters to droughts, from heartbreak to parting with loved ones. He yelled, advancing relentlessly, building upon the fear that had planted its roots in the intruders. The leader's confidence withered, his bravado evaporating with every step Jack took toward them. In desperation, the last three men tried to escape, but they were caught off guard by Jack's relentless drive. He barred the way again, the pitchfork raised like a shield. Suddenly, the sound of tires screeched against gravel pierced the air. Jack's heart leapt as he turned to see a familiar vehicle pulling up, the lights flashing like a beacon of hope. Irene, his neighbor, had arrived just in time. "Jack," she shouted, stepping out of her truck, concern etched across her face. He shouted back, the weight of the situation slowly lifting. The sight of her was enough to bolster his confidence, and he felt a surge of energy coursing through him. The masked men were shifting nervously, glancing from Jack to Irene, realizing that their plan was crumbling. One of them shouted, backing away, ready to flee. Irene called out, her voice firm, rallying him as she pulled out her phone. As she dialed, Jack pushed forward again, brandishing the pitchfork. With that, the leader turned and bolted down the porch steps, followed by the others who scrambled to escape. They stumbled over each other in their rush for safety. Jack tightened his grip on the pitchfork, eyes narrowed with focus. He yelled, stepping squarely in their path, refusing to let fear take root in his heart again. The adrenaline surged through him like a tidal wave, and he had no intention of backing down. The leader shouted again, panic straining his voice. But Jack stood resolute, the pitchfork a barrier they could not cross. They were daunted, shadows chasing them with the promise of consequences, which made them hesitate. They turned and ran toward the tree line, bodies colliding as they fought to break free of Jack's determined stance. Just as they disappeared into the dark woods, sirens echoed in the distance, signaling that help was near. Jack stepped back, lowering the pitchfork as the police arrived, lights flashing bright against the darkening sky. Officers rushed toward them, ready to secure the area. Jack felt the weight of relief wash over him, the tension loosening its grip. One of the officers asked, as Jack stood by the porch, breathless but triumphant. "They came to rob me," Jack said, his voice steady, each word reinforcing his pride. Irene stepped beside him, a smile of relief on her face mingling with pride. "He handled it like a pro," she said, her admiration evident. As the officers reported back to headquarters, Jack caught his breath, replaying the encounter in his mind. The masked men had entered his property with the assumption that they could take what they wanted. They had underestimated him, the quiet farmer who spent long days in the field. But he knew the truth now, and it wasn't just about protecting his land. It was about standing up against the darkness, declaring that he wouldn't be victimized. He felt like a part of something bigger, like the land he fought for had etched itself into his spirit. Night fell and the stars began to twinkle overhead, each one a witness to the struggle that had just played out. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that as Dodge danger faded, it set the stage for something scarier. The officer spoke again, breaking into his thoughts. "Of course," Jack replied, but his mind wandered, still replaying the chaos and the adrenaline. As he looked out over his fields, a sense of unease began to creep back again. What if they came back? They had lost this fight, but desperation makes people do dangerous things. Jack shifted his gaze to the darkened tree line, a shadow inside the night. Would they regroup? Would they bring friends? The seeds of doubt began to sprout, creeping into his thoughts like weeds in a garden, entwining with the fires of resolve that had flared as he defended his home. Irene's voice snapped him back. "Yeah, just thinking," he said, forcing a smile, but inside, uncertainty tightened its grip. Irene nodded, concern darkening her features. As the officers began to disperse, Jack felt a flicker of warmth in her offer. Perhaps they could fortify his defenses, plot a strategy against the threat lingering just beyond his land. But with each passing second, the shadows around the farmhouse seemed to stretch further into the fields, growing darker, pooled with dread. The night deepened, and even as he prepared for a night in the farmhouse, he couldn't shake a lingering thought that the battles were just beginning. And at that moment, somewhere in the flickering shadows, he felt the churn of might and impending storm brewing. Because while tonight was a victory, it was merely a chapter in a tale that had only just begun. As Jack turned away from the dark woods, a low rustle sounded from the trees and his heart froze. For somewhere out there, the masked men had retreated, but their defeat had not quelled the fire of their intent. He gripped the pitchfork tighter, knowing that the fight for his land had only ignited a new conflict, and it was a battle he had no choice but to face. Would he defend his legacy once again? Would he stand tall against the encroaching darkness? Silent tension loomed in the air, each heartbeat echoing the question that lingered. The return was imminent, and Jack was ready, for the storm would come, and he would stand against it, built for whatever lay ahead.